Today, I thought I'd talk about what's behind this fabric. This is a table from the early to mid 1800s, according to the fellow who sold it to me. It's flame mahogany. And a looker, I think. It has its original porcelain casters on it, but mechanically they're not great. There's one that butts up against the wood, so it doesn't roll very smoothly on its own. I generally lift it. When I do lift it and shift it back, it reveals that it's a bit more than just a table. What it actually is a games table. Now, it's obviously been refelted at least once by the previous owners. But, well, these things do wear off. If it actually is as old as I've been told it is, it's still in pretty remarkable shape. Being a games table, it does have a little space for storing pieces. It's pretty rough, but I'd heard that it was reasonably difficult to not put so much, care into interior spaces. So, as this was the fanciest games table I own, I thought it might be a reasonable opener to a conversation about playing surfaces. I'll be blunt and honest. For an actual pen and paper role-playing game, this is not the most practical place to play. And I haven't used it for one yet. Though I can certainly imagine running a smaller game with just a couple of players on it. Especially if it were in a historical setting that demanded an extra push of atmosphere. Could be very nice for something like Vampire. Or any game really with a personal scope and a smaller player count. When I'm running a game with up to 7 players at a time, though, I'm much more likely to just use a big dining room table. Or, just as frequently, a floor somewhere. As much as I trust my players, accidents happen, and I'd prefer they didn't happen to such lovely objects. when I'm playing something that lends itself to using a grid, like 3rd edition or 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons often do, I often use one of these. It's a pad of chart paper from Staples, or, any generic office supply store, I guess. And they generally come with 50 to 100 sheets, and they're pretty big, and they do nicely. Each square is 1 inch on every side, which fits in well with many sorts of miniatures. Many people use dry erase surfaces that are gridded in the same way, or wet erase surfaces. And the advantage with those is that the surface is reusable. But the handy thing with these big pads is that if ever you have a scene that you want the players to be able to come back to, you can just tear off the sheet and store it reasonably permanently. There are also people who use projector setups, which are probably the ideal solution, but obviously significantly more expensive. These pages can be used for overworlds, like this map that was used in my 4th edition D&D game a while back. And they serve that purpose reasonably well. Or they can serve as interiors, like this little gnome home from the same game. Now, aside from the fact that paper maps are reusable and can be put in storage and brought back later, one of the reasons I really like them is that they allow you real flexibility in terms of the sort of, well, the things you can write on them with. For instance, here I've written some little hidden notes in invisible UV ink, which was probably slightly ridiculous to do, but it means that if there's an area that they wouldn't normally know about without looking more closely, I can have that hidden away as a little surprise. And, well, as you can see, pencil in the general details later once they already know. And this can be used to hide all sorts of information. Whether that's elevation, or just all sorts of little notes. Now, I'm not saying this is my typical jamming practice. My players would know that's an absolute lie. But, occasionally it's nice to prepare a little surprise, even if most of the time your maps just look like abstract squiggles and everything needs to be explained. For instance, this is the inside of a church, actually. A church/community center with benches, tables, and elevated library balconies accessible only by teleportation. Let's face it, if you're playing a game that takes place mostly in your imagination, this can easily be the log cabin of the frost giant Jarl, or this can be the Crystal Tower of Al-Mirak, which is naturally highly defensible against frost giants. There's no requisite level of realism in the role-playing games. Little accessories and aids. I'll use pennies and little glass tokens as often as I'll use miniatures or, you know, elaborate representations. Even if you want a little extra ambiance, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to the work. There are plenty of companies producing game aids in the form of tiles or pre-made maps for certain settings. Like ruins or caves or battlefields or temples or jungle type settings. Just the sorts of things you would expect to find in a typical fantasy world. And sometimes you get less typical things too. What can be even better though, especially if you're not locked into a grid-heavy game, is just searching the internet for a schematic of what you're interested in having your players encounter. These resources can be particularly useful if you're running a modern setting. Something like World of Darkness or Shadowrun. You just take the image into Photoshop and maybe throw a layer on top of it for each character, shifting them around when you need them to be represented elsewhere. There are lots and lots of ways you can represent your game world. The most important thing is that you can get your players in the position where they're ready to take that representation and run with it.